The 11th chapter. Once it is known what is not truth, only truth will remain, shining brightly amongst the skins its enemies have dressed it in. Iker. As Deicide made his way toward the great tree where the machine mother abided, he watched this pleasant ecology form back into the twisted architecture of the machine. Growths that appeared to be great roots were actually thousands of cables packed tightly together, running into and out of the broken and warped metal decks. The soft blue grass gave way to the fields of shallow graves marked by rifles. Rivers of shell casings and shattered swords ran between them. He felt as though he had stepped through another gate. The artificial sun overhead was now a crimson glow that bled onto the landscape beneath it. Deicide crawled over the cables that had warped this land with their unchecked growth, climbing higher and higher until he began to see evidence of there being life beneath his feet. The beautiful village he had left behind was no more. Mountains of corpses burst from the blood-soaked soil surrounding him, all groaning and scratching, cursing his name as he passed, crushing their bones underfoot, mostly by accident. They wailed and screeched as Deicide pulled his heels away from their filthy claws. Cloudy, sunken eyes squirmed inside of partially collapsed skulls. He stopped as he came to a patch of familiar faces, blotched and tallowed skin pulled tight across bony heads. Deicide crouched down to meet the animated corpses of people he once knew. As they attempted to speak, they vomited black vested material as they gurgled through the mess. It spewed from their eye sockets and oozed from their nasal cavities. One dug a gnarled claw into its mouth and slapped it against Deicide's face, leaving a black, oily smudge. His enemies and friends were stacked on top of one another without care for allegiance or rank. Though not his doing, Deicide was embarrassed by this ridiculous shrine. The trembling skulls parted as another rose to the surface. It was the disfigured face of Rodella, and the top quarter of her skull was missing, replaced by quivering vestige. One of her dead brown eyes had been replaced by a yellow one that was too large to match the other. It rolled around in her grimy socket until it found Deicide. Bony claws emerged from beside her head, latching on to Deicide's face. He lacked the strength to break her grip, and he was pulled close until their foreheads were touching, a common gesture amongst eaters who were close. She caressed his head, brushing back his antennas, now flashing rapidly with panic. "This is all that God sees," Rodella said. "This is all that God eats. Do not complete the circuit, Father." Then she opened her jaws wide, allowing her stomach and intestines to rise through her throat and bulge from her mouth, spewing their contents onto his face as the entrails burst open. Deicide had finally wrenched himself free and scrambled over the field of immobile, screaming zombies, sprinting as he never had before. In his ears were the drums of battle. The smoke from burning corpses found his nose. As a war child, he was well acquainted with the smell. He himself had turned legions of men into a living funeral pyre for the Emperor at their center. He was left wondering exactly what all the carnage and terror had been for. No one who mattered seemed impressed by any of his victories. He recalled thinking to himself that if enough people were killed, surely a true God would intervene. But no one came. As he ran, he almost thought he could outrun his sins, that he could escape this ship, that he would somehow be absolved of the slaughter which he had enacted upon countless worlds. With his sharp fingers he dug into the cables at the base of the tree and thrust himself skyward, taking hold of the nooks provided. Quickly reaching the top, he found 2 pairs of large feet. He gazed up to find 2 giants staring down at him. Their hair was greasy and stringy. Their bodies were pink abominations. Each looked as though they were each other's aborted, conjoined twin. They ducked and met his eyes on an even plane, and though their eyes were shuttered with thick cataracts, they could still recognize their captain. Long pink limbs reached out to grasp Deicide, their grip mighty but loving, leaving Deicide squirming between their wrinkly, saggy bosoms, trying to figure out who they were. They set him down and ushered him to the dais which held the machine mother. He waded through oceans of cable and wire. Dim and cracked displays hung on bent mounting brackets. He pushed aside a web-like curtain to behold the machine mother, lounging in her throne. From the back of her head and spine ran millions of tiny wires and umbilicals. She raised her hand slightly, motioning for Deicide to approach. He was lost in her eyes, so much like the glow of the morning sun. He kissed her soft gray hand and knelt beside her, then ran his fingers through the tiny black umbilicals that many would mistake for hair. She tilted her head and examined the fresh scars on his body. With his hands on her face, Deicide moved forward to kiss her, and then noticed the hulking monstrosities were watching them both. He noticed that one never moved without the other, as if they were bound together by some invisible chain. "It's the twins," Nott said. Deicide turned back toward them, peering into the horrible twisted faces underneath the greasy black hair. In disbelief, Deicide shook his head. The pretty things he had watched become intelligent women had been ravaged by some unknown ailment, driven out of proportion, and they each possessed a great arm that looked more like a giant's club, and a withered, feeble one to match it. They no longer possessed mouths. Instead, Destra and Sinestra communicated to Nott through the umbilicals flowing from their skulls. They looked as if their bodies had tried to mimic the towering anatomy of an obstrusion, with horrible results. The genetic adaptation to this world had left them sorry, misshapen beasts. Without leaving the pair, Deicide called back to Nott. "What happened to them?" Deicide said, caressing the twisted backs of the twins. "They couldn't hold their shapes. The body of an immortal will morph to fit the need. Remember my lecture on personal evolution," Nott said. Immediately and selfishly, Deicide thought how he might look after trillions of years. Embarrassed by the thought, he dashed it away, knowing that Nott might have intercepted it. He returned to his wife's side, smiling, unable to hide his joy. Nott rubbed his cheek with a tiny gray hand. "I knew you would return," Nott said. "You have to tell me what happened. This place, this can't really be the Yolopile," Deicide said. "Truly, it is. All dimensions, including the half-worlds, are bleeding into one another," Nott said. "And now the Yolopile spreads across many spans of time, as well as space." But how?" Deicide said. "Your choices have brought this upon us," Nott said. "There will be only one time, flowing toward a fateful end." Deicide slouched against her throne, clutching her legs as if they were the key to solving his problems. Show me how to fix this," Deicide said, watching the twins as they sat in front of him, as they and all of his own children had gathered in his office long ago to hear fables of exploits. Never would he have believed he would do something to harm his darlings. But even if the open grave surrounding the tree was some sort of delusion, the suffering he had witnessed was real. "Tell me what you saw before entering this place," Nott said. "Horror! One massive grave for anyone I have ever touched," Deicide said. Nott gestured to the surrounding landscape. "If this world is so, then it is what you desired," Nott said, pausing to lift his chin with a finger. "But you are not bound by time," she said. "Then what will I do?" Deicide said. "You will kill the pretender. That much is certain. I can only see that event play out one way. However, you have but a single choice before you. Complete the circuit, and you and the Yolopile will sail forever, devouring everything until there is nowhere where she is not. Or do not complete the circuit, and dissolve the partitions, keeping our dimensions from merging and all vessels from warring. Could we not live in peace? Deicide said. What if I told you of the corridor? Once merged, all would become aware of the corridor and what is at the end of it.